Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in philosophy we will be talking about basic concepts in ethics. To discuss this topic we have with us our subject expert Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy in School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
Welcome viewers. Today the topic of our discussion is basic concepts in the study of ethics. So as we all know that ethics is basically a systematic study of the moral worth of any action, any human action. In order to talk further about ethics, we first of all need to know what are the different components, what are the different elements that are involved in a human action. For that purpose, we'll have to have some kind of knowledge about the structure or anatomy of human action. So as we all know, a human action involves, first of all, a motivation to act, then an action itself, and then certain consequences that accrue from the given action. Now, the starting point, as we can see from here, of any action is motivation. Now, when we talk about motivation, there could be different motivating factors for a given action. At times, and actually in the animal world all the time, most of the time, we act out of our desires. We act motivated by our desires. So most of the time our actions are propelled from a certain desire to achieve something, and accordingly we do our calculations, and in accordance with those calculations or contemplations we act in order to achieve that. Now, another process that is many a times involved as a part of the motivation factor in action is intellection. At times, if we so train ourselves, we are not propelled by our immediate desires. We at times involve ourselves in a process of intellection over whether that desire is an appropriate desire to act, and so on and so forth. So there, some intellection process requires some reasoning ability. So reason partakes in motivation if we involve intellection also as a part of the action. Second part of human action is will. At times we may have desire, we might have gone through a process of intellection as well, but we may not have will to act. So will is another, willing to act is another very important part of a human action. Now, as far as the will is concerned, there are, as we have already discussed in one of our further previous lectures, our will could be free or determined. Now, there is a vast amount of literature present in that was produced during medieval times, according to which our willing is determined, is preordained by some divine source. If that were to be the case, then it problematizes the issue of the moral worth of human action in a certain way. We'll come to that point later again, but to briefly discuss it here, if our will were to be determined, then in a certain way, one of the objections that comes forth is that if my will is already determined, then it's difficult to talk about the moral worth of an action, because that would mean I was going to perform that action in any case. I was going to perform a given action in any case. So if that action was a part of preordained events, that were going to come forth in any case, then I could not, then the person who is acted in a certain way cannot be held responsible for that particular action. But also at the same time, there are certain philosophers who have argued that our will is determined not completely, but only partially. So that solves the problem in a certain way, but problematizes it in another way. We will come to that point later. So another postulate of ethics is that our action should arise out of free will in order for us to have a moral evaluation of that action at all. So, if our will is already determined in a certain way, then we cannot, properly speaking, talk about the moral worth of that action, because it problematizes the agency of the action. Because properly speaking, if my will is determined already, then I am not the actual agent of the action. Actual agent of the action in that case would be somebody who has determined my will in a particular way. So, one of the postulates of ethics is that in order for an action to have a moral worth, it should spring from a free will. The person should be acting out of free will. Another component of it is, which is a part of will only, is that the person should have choice. It shouldn't be the case that I could be willing to act in a particular way, but I don't have a choice. So, choices could at times be restricted. As a matter of fact, as human beings, we never have completely free choice in a certain sense, because we are embodied human beings. That means by the very fact of our being embodied, we have certain restrictions, certain space and time restrictions to begin with. We cannot be present at two places at the same time, and so on and so forth. So in a certain sense, we never have a completely unrestricted choice. But given the fact of being in a situation that characterizes every human being in any case, apart from that choice, we could have, apart from those restrictions, there could be more than one choice that should be available to us in order for our action to have any moral worth at all. Because if I don't have any choice, then that would mean that I am compelled, I am bound to act in one particular way. So, another postulate of ethics, of any ethical action, is that the agent, the moral agent, the person who performs an action, should have a choice. But over and apart from that, as a part of the discussion on the choice, we should also understand that at times we may be acting out of free will, and we may be thinking about performing a particular action. But then circumstances could be such that we may not be free to act. So that means the reason why we discuss action separately is that free will doesn't always amount to free action. Free action has its own parameters. So, say for example, suppose I have to go somewhere, and I am willing to go somewhere. I have motivation as well. I have a desire to go somewhere, but the circumstances are such that, say for example, there may be a hurricane outside the house. In that case, I am not free. Actually, I am not free to act in that sense. The circumstances don't allow me. So, one could study it from the point of choice also. Circumstances don't allow me to choose a particular action. So that choice in a certain way is not available. So, apart from that, at times actions could be, we may be performing certain actions under certain compulsions, under threat, and so on and so forth. So, in that case also, we cannot evaluate the moral worth of that action. So, unless the action is performed freely, out of a choice, out of free will, we cannot, properly speaking, evaluate the moral worth of that particular action. Now, the final point of any ethical action, any human ethical action, is the consequences. So, from any particular action, there are certain consequences that come forth. These consequences could be the ones that we had desired for initially in the first place, and these consequences at times, because of certain reasons beyond our control, certain situational factors, certain environmental factors, may not result in the desired outcome. So, at times the consequences could be undesired as well. But the reason why we are discussing all these different components of human action is that the subject matter of ethics involves evaluating the moral worth of an action. That's the central point of ethics as a subdiscipline of study in philosophy. So, now moral worth of an action could be evaluated depending upon which particular part of the human action that we are focusing on. So, there is a way of evaluating a human action on the basis of the motivational factors. So, whether I acted out of an immediate desire without taking into consideration the outcomes of it, or even if the outcomes are the desired ones, even then the ethical question remains still intact, whether I ought to have done, whether I ought to have performed that particular action. So, motivation could be one factor in the evaluation of a particular ethical action. We may take consequences also into consideration, whether the consequences are the ones that are desirable in a particular situation. So, there is a way of calling a particular action good or bad in terms of the consequences that we were looking for from there. Similarly, we could evaluate a particular action on the basis of will. Whether we were willing in a certain way that applies for everyone, and so on and so forth. So, the reason why a study or a knowledge of the different factors that are involved in human action is important is because there are several ways of evaluating moral action depending upon which particular part of human action we are laying more emphasis upon. So, having studied that, having understood that, now we can take into consideration the different criteria that we may put in the center in order for judging one's action. First and foremost, probably we could study, we could have a look at how one could have an evaluation of human action on the basis of the will. Among the foremost philosophers who presents a theory of evaluation of moral action on the basis of the will that propels one to a particular action is Kant. And this kind of moral evaluation of a particular action is called deontology. Deontology, broadly defined, very broadly defined, could be viewed as rule-based ethics. So, if we have a particular rule regarding a particular action in mind and we are acting accordingly on the basis of some formal rule, on the basis of some formal principle, that would involve deontology, that would be a part of deontology. Similarly, there are philosophers who would rather judge a particular action on the basis of consequences that accrue from a particular action. The foremost amongst such thinkers is Mill, and his theory is called utilitarianism. So, as the term itself suggests, and this theory is also utilitarianism is as a part of a broader concept called consequentialism. So, consequentialism in ethics is a view according to which we should judge one's action on the basis of the consequences of that action. And according to Mill, we should judge the worth of an action according to the utility of that action in maximizing the happiness of a person and a given group, of a particular group at large. Also, we could motivation also could be considered as a factor in judging one's action. So, having a good moral character, developing virtues, giving preference to certain kind of feelings like compassion and so on and so forth, and developing our character in accordance with certain human feelings, all that involves judging one's action on the basis of motivation. So, and this kind of view of ethics is mainly held by Aristotle in the West, and Buddhism by and large holds on to that view. So, having seen the different ways in which we could have moral evaluation of a given action, now we could shift on to to have a look at Kant's ideas regarding ethics. So, Kant first of all says an action would be called good only if it arises out of goodwill. Now, the next question that comes to the fore that arises from here is, what does Kant mean when he uses the word goodwill? He defines goodwill as, and I quote, nothing in the world, indeed nothing even beyond the world, can possibly be conceived which could be called good without qualification except a goodwill. Goodwill is a kind of will which is not good for what it achieves, but simply because of its willing, it is good of itself. So, according to him, the only thing from the point of view of ethics because of which a certain action could be held to be good is the will behind that action. If the will behind that action is good, then the action could be judged as good as well. But goodwill is defined as a will which is goodwill is will which is good in itself, not because of something that is extraneous to it. So, what does that mean? What that means to say is that a will, it wouldn't be good because certain achievements have come forth from it. So, if we are acting out of goodwill, at times it might happen that the end result may not be in accordance with our need. It may not be in accordance with what we had desired initially. But that does not in any case take the goodness of the goodwill away from it. So, that is one main thing that we need to keep in our mind when we discuss goodwill. So, goodwill is something that is good in itself, irrespective of the actual outcome of the action performed in accordance with that goodwill. Thirdly, Kant says, even something in Kant's words, even if goodwill does not prove effectual in accomplishing an end, it is still worthwhile and should be valued for its own sake, such that it would sparkle like a jewel in its own right, as something that had its full worth in itself. So, that means goodwill is something that shines by its own light. It doesn't borrow its goodness from something else. It shines like a jewel. So it's something that is good in itself. Fourth point that Kant talks about with reference to his ideas on ethics is, only goodwill is the reason for which an action could have a moral worth. An action done for practical considerations or as a result of natural inclination, even if it were in accord with duty, has no moral worth. So as we just discussed about Kant, so there may be certain actions which may be in accordance with what was sought to be achieved by goodwill, but since they were not the propelling factor behind those actions was not goodwill, therefore the moral worth of that particular action wouldn't be as high as it otherwise could have been. Example of it could be, say for example, somebody is riding a bicycle because somebody does not have money to buy a car. So in that case, of course, what that person is doing is very much in accordance with one's caring about the environment. So that person is not polluting the environment, but his willing, the will involved in action is not the protection of environment, in the sense that he's not keeping himself, he's not acting on a maxim according to which one should always act in that particular way. So since he's not acting on goodwill, therefore even though it is in conformity with a good action, its moral worth wouldn't be same. So these are some of the basic ideas in Kant's deontology. Apart from that, there is another very important concept that Kant discusses as a part of his views on ethics. He talks about categorical imperative. Now, what is categorical imperative? Categorical imperative is a formalized principle which should be framed in such a way that it applies on everybody, irrespective of who the particular agent is. What do we mean when we say that? Kant says that whenever I'm sort of willing to act, then my willing should be based on a formal principle, and that formal principle should be that I should form a principle which is not applicable for me, but I should consider myself I should view myself as shorn of any particularities, and I should frame the principle in such a way that it should be applicable to not me but to everybody. So I'm framing a formal principle for everybody and in that particular situation. So if I'm framing the formal principle of my action in such a way, then it would be tantamount to categorical imperative. So it would be binding upon me because of reasons which wouldn't be extraneous to the situation. Apart from that, categorical imperative could be also viewed in opposition to what is called hypothetical imperative. Hypothetical imperative means a situation where I'm acting in a particular way because of certain reasons. So hypothetical proposition in any case is always of the form of if then. If this happens, then that would happen too. So hypothetical imperative are of if then structure. So if I perform an action like this, then this might happen. So if this is the kind of imperative I formulate in order which acts as a maxim for my for my action, that would be a hypothetical imperative. I would be acting upon that principle because of certain reasons. And in that case, it would not have the same kind of moral worth that an action performed on the basis of categorical imperative would be. So, regarding categorical imperative, Kant says, categorical imperative would be one which presented an action as of itself objectively necessary without regard to any other end. So, categorical imperative does not involve any consideration of any kind outside of that imperative. So, in that sense, it does not have the if-then structure. It is self-referential without any reference to anything outside of itself. So, in this particular section, we discussed the general human anatomy of human actions and Kant's ideas on ethics. Welcome back, viewers. So, we were talking about Kant's ideas on ethics. As a part of that, we studied that for Kant, what is important in order to judge the worth of an action is the maxim, the formal principle on the basis of which we are performing that particular action. So, which is also called the maxim behind the action. And we also saw that according to Kant, this maxim should be such that it shouldn't be hypothetical in nature. Hypothetical meaning that there should not be any considerations regarding what could be the outcome of that particular action. So, it wouldn't be of the nature of if and then. It has to be of the nature of categorical imperative, which means that it has to be an imperative which is good for itself, and its worth comes from the fact that when I am legislating that particular imperative, when I am formulating that particular imperative, I am not doing it for myself, I am doing it for anybody who were to be in my case. So, it is not particular in nature. So, a categorical imperative would be of the kind, anybody, if that person were in this situation, should act in this particular way. So, this is how I will have to formulate the principle of my action in my mind through a completely rational process, which wouldn't involve any appeal to sensations, to feelings, to inclinations, and so on and so forth. So, I shouldn't be thinking about whether I would feel good after performing an action like this or not. That may or may not be the outcome, but we are not going to judge that particular action on the basis of those particular feelings that may accrue from it. So, categorical imperative is of a universal kind. It does not appeal to any particularities of the situation. Or another way of putting it could be that it is synthetic a priori. This is another term that's used by Kant with reference to his epistemology. So, it is such kind of principle is a priori in the sense that it is applicable for everyone. And it is synthetic in a certain sense, because we are talking at the end of it, we would be acting in a particular situation on the basis of that universal maxim that we have formulated. So, categorical imperative is universal on the basis of which we act in a particular situation. So, in a certain way, the question of a particular action starts from a particular situation, but then we take it to a universal level and formulate a principle which should be universally valid, and I must act upon that maxim because it is universally applicable. So, this is how we could understand the categorical imperative from particular to universal, and since now this particular situation, from this particular situation I formulated a command which is universally applicable, therefore I am acting upon it, not because of the particular reasons of that particular situation. So, these are some of the main distinctions of the categorical imperative. Another important idea that Kant discusses as a part of his ethics is that human beings should always be considered as an end in himself or herself. So, he says human beings are always ends in themselves, and a human person who is performing an action is a legislator, therefore, in the kingdom of ends. So, what he says as a part of this point is rational nature exists as an end in itself. So, Kant emphasizes upon the rational nature of all human beings, even though we have natural inclinations also. But what is distinctive about human actions is that we can act rationally, unlike probably animals. So, our rational nature, our capacity to reason is what distinguishes ourselves. So, rational nature exists as an end in itself. Therefore, a human person or an ethical agent is an end in herself, not merely a means. What it means is a moral agent, the one who performs an action, should not consider herself or as somebody else as a means towards an end, because categorical imperative does not refer to anything outside of itself. So, it is completely rational, completely based on reason. So, Kant tries to explain it another way. He says the distinction between things and persons is that things have only relative worth with respect to something else as a means, whereas persons have an existence as an end in themselves. So, the difference between things and persons is that things do not seem to have any value for themselves. Things are judged only on the basis of what worth they might have in a particular situation. So, say for example, on a hot day, a blanket may not be of much use to us. So, we wouldn't have much worth for us. But given a particular situation, if it's a cold night, then blanket would have a lot of worth for us. So, things, the worth of things is evaluated on the basis of considering them as means towards something else, whereas a human person is a rational being. Therefore, in virtue of that person being a rational person, has a value in itself in virtue of his being a rational human being. So, a human person is an end in herself and should never be considered as a means towards something else. So, accordingly, Kant exhorts that one should act only according to that maxim which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law, meaning to say universal law applicable for everybody. So, since all human beings are same, are never means towards something, so it should be equally applicable. So, as in place of a moral agent, all rational human beings have the same place. So, we should act in according to a maxim which can at the same time be willed such that it could become a universal law, meaning it should be applicable to everyone, because everyone is an end in him or herself. Also, he says, act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never as a means only. And final outcome of such kind of consideration would be that ethical agent in that sense is a legislator in the kingdom of ends. So, viewed in such a way where everyone is an end in itself, in herself, so we should act considering that we are living in a world where every human being, every person is an end unto herself, and when I legislate something for myself, then in the same act I am legislating for everyone, without considering anybody else as an end towards any particular ethical action. So, so these were some of the important ideas that Kant puts forth as a part of his views on ethics. So, some of the important ideas, as we have already discussed, is that our action is good if it is based on, if it is in accordance with goodwill. Goodwill is something that is good in itself, not because of any extraneous reasons, but because of the goodness of itself. And then we should be acting on the basis of a categorical imperative. Categorical imperative, it could be understood as something opposite of hypothetical imperative. Hypothetical imperative involves performing a particular action for particular reasons. So, we perform a particular action because then certain outcome would be achieved. So, as opposed to that, categorical imperative does not refer to anything beyond itself. And third and final consideration in Kant's ethics is that we should never treat a person in virtue of the rationality of that person as we should never treat a person as an end towards towards something else. So, every person has the same moral has the same status for all moral considerations. So, since categorical imperative has to be universally applicable, so I should consider everyone as equal if that person were to be in my place. Now, we could shift the focus of our discussion to another important view, which is called utilitarianism, and J.S. Mill is one of the important, one of the foremost proponent of such view. Now, utilitarianism, as I pointed out earlier, is a subset of theory of ethics called consequentialism, where we, as opposed to deontology, where we judge the moral value, the moral worth of an action on the basis of the end result of it. So, according to utilitarianism, the worth of an action would depend upon its utility towards a desired end. Now that desired end could sort of vary according to how we view the world in a certain way. But according to Mill, what we desire is happiness. So accordingly, he says, actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, and wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. So what he says, what J.S. Mill says, is that all human beings have a desire for happiness. So since happiness is desired, therefore it has a value of its own because we desire it. And since all of us desire happiness, therefore any action which leads to, which results in a certain amount of happiness would have its worth on the basis of how much happiness it is able to generate. And accordingly, that action would be wrong if it produces something reverse of happiness. If it doesn't generate happiness, instead it generates sadness, then the moral worth of that action would be completely gone. Now, if we will believe in such view, then there are several questions that come to the fore, that are really that come into relief. One is that how do we? There could be different considerations regarding the pleasures themselves. There are different kinds of pleasures. Pleasures not only differ in terms of intensity and so on and so forth, but they could be qualitatively also different. Now there are different views on this topic. Earlier than Mill, Jeremy Bentham had supposed that pleasures vary only in quantity. So according to Bentham, different instances of pleasure or happiness could differ only in terms of quantity. So there could be instances when I am feeling less happy, there could be instances where I am feeling more happy, and so on and so forth. And another thing that we should keep in mind here is that there are certain philosophers who might think of pleasures as different from happiness. So what does it mean is that there are people who go through penance. There are certain virtue-based views of ethics where pleasure is not given so much of value. So therefore, but ultimately we perform penance for certain kind of happiness. So somebody may be deriving, maybe having some kind of happiness out of certain situations which may involve no immediate pleasure at all. So we might have an inclination to believe that somehow pleasure and happiness are two different concepts. So they cannot be used equivocally. But for all practical purposes, whether it is Bentham or it's Mill, both of them use pleasure and use the terms pleasure and happiness interchangeably. So according to them, there is no fundamental difference between the idea of pleasure and the idea of happiness. So now coming back to what we were discussing, Jeremy Bentham says that pleasures, different instances of pleasures could vary only in terms of quantity, in the sense that at certain times when I am happy, I may be feeling more intense pleasure, and at certain other times I may not be happy or feeling pleasure to the same extent. But J.S. Mill not only takes quantity into consideration, but holds that different instances of happiness and pleasure differ in quality as well. So there is one fundamental difference between what is called hedonistic calculus, with regard to hedonistic calculus, between Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill. J.S. Mill gives the due place to the quality of happiness and pleasure also. while evaluating moral worth of an action. So he has famously said that it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. So what he means to say is that at times we may be dissatisfied, but since we are involved in some kind of a higher pursuit, therefore our quality of pleasure it could be of a higher kind. There may not be any immediate pleasure involved in those kind of situations, but whatever little amount of pleasure, happiness we might have in those instances is qualitatively of such a different degree that it's still desirable in comparison to some of the immediate pleasures which we can get more quickly. But an important question that might come to our mind at this point is, how do we make the qualitative difference? There has to be some way of making this distinction. So according to Mill, the test of qualitative difference between different instances of happiness is that of two pleasures, if there be one to which all or almost all who have experience of both give a decided preference irrespective of any feeling of moral obligation to prefer it, that is the more desirable pleasure. In simpler words, his criteria of taking a decision upon qualitative difference between different instances of pleasures is that all the different people who have had an experience of two different kinds of pleasures, two different instances of pleasures, and then the majority of them decide in favor of one kind of pleasure over other, in that case, we would qualitatively value that particular instance, those particular instances of happiness more, for which largest number of people have given preference. So here it's a simple rule of majority. Anybody who has experienced both the instances, the number of people, given number of people who have experienced both the instances, and the majority preferring one particular instance, would give us reasons to evaluate that particular kind of pleasure as higher than the other. Now, there is another question that arises regarding Mill's utilitarianism at this point, which is that questions about ends are questions about what things are desirable. So, according to Mill, the question of desirability is intimately connected with the question of ends. So, if somebody asks, why is a certain action desirable, then he says the only way to answer it would be in terms of the ends that particular action results in. So he says, for discussing it further, he says, the only proof capable of being given that an object is visible is that people actually see it. The only proof that a sound is audible is that people hear it, and so of the other sources of our experience. In like manner, I apprehend the sole evidence it is possible to produce that anything is desirable is that people do actually desire it. No reason can be given why the general principle is why the general happiness is desirable, except that each person, so far as he believes it to be attainable, desires his own happiness. So the point here that we are raising is that some people desire something, and whether that thing is desirable are two different order questions. So saying that somebody desires or all of us desire one particular thing is a kind of statement of fact. We are just describing. It's a kind of a description. We're just describing that almost all of us desire happiness. But the question of desirability is a higher order question. Even if all of us desire something, it does not necessarily mean that it is desirable also. So, these are two different kind of questions. But according to Mill, the only way of answering it is in terms of description only. So as he says, the only proof that we can offer regarding visibility of something is that whether a person is actually able to see something or not. That is the only proof. Similarly, the only proof of desirability of a particular action or a particular object in a particular situation is whether it is actually desired or not. So, according to him, the question of desirability is intimately connected with what is desired. Now, as we can see on the face of it, there are several objections that could be placed against such kind of view regarding moral worth of an action. One of the foremost objection that may come to our mind is that there is this fundamental idea in the study of ethics that there is a clear distinction between fact and value. So, fact is what we call what actually is the case. And when we are making a value statement, we are talking about what should be the case. So, there is a sea of difference between what is the case and what should be the case for our ethical consideration. So, one general rule in ethics is that we can never derive a value from a fact. So, this is the same kind of problem that arises with regard to utilitarianism. If something is the fact, then it does not mean that because of its being a fact, it adds to the moral value of that particular fact. So, what I mean to say here is that if our propositions are in accordance with facts, then they are of epistemological value. Say, for example, if I formulate a kind of a description, I say that I see a table over there, and the fact is that it is actually the table over there, then what I have said, my proposition has an epistemological worth, has an epistemological value. It has then we can say whatever I am saying is actually true. Therefore, I know it to be the case. But epistemological valuation is very different from ethical evaluation. We can never derive an ought from is. If something is the case, then no matter what, the question of whether that ought to be the case is very, very different. And in order to answer that question, whether that ought to be the case, we can never appeal to the actual fact of the situation. So, therefore, considering that, one could say that being desirable, something the desirability of a given something cannot be ascertained on the basis of the fact that it is desired. So, being desirable is not tantamount to the meaning that it ought to be desired. So, when we say that happiness is desired, it is then we are stating it as a matter of fact. When we say that it is desirable, or whether we ask the question whether it is desirable, then we are asking the question whether it ought to be desired, which is a very different kind of question altogether. So, Mill somewhere, if you look at the fact values distinction, he seems to be overlooking this fact value distinction according to some of the critics. Also, according to some other thinkers, inclinations, if we act immediately upon our inclinations, then we determine our actions in a certain natural way in any case. So that would mean not taking into account the rational nature of a human being. So since desires are a kind of a subspecies of inclinations, therefore acting upon them may be viewed as putting aside any worth towards the process of intellection, the process of reasoning out whether the particular action is good or not. That would also mean putting aside the rational nature of human beings, which according to some of the critics of utilitarianism, something that Mill seems to be overlooking. And also apart from that, according to certain other philosophers, mainly amongst them Moore, says that Mill's idea involves naturalistic fallacy, because he's thinking about goodness of something in terms of some natural property of a thing, which according to him involves naturalistic fallacy. So, friends, in today's discussion, we generally looked at what are the basic concepts that are involved in the study of ethics. Of course, it's a very broad area. There are several other things that would form part of a separate discussion. But in this particular discussion, we saw what are the different factors involved in given human action, what are the different ways of judging moral worth of an action depending upon which particular part of component of the action we are focusing on, and as a part of that we discussed the views on ethics propounded by Kant and Mill and the criticism of that. Thank you.
On that note, I would like to thank Sir for this very interesting discussion, and I would like to thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.